Hi, everyone. I'm Jillian Rader, and welcome to Lincoln Park Zoo's podcast, That Tracks. Today I'm here with...
I'm Katrina Quint, the Director of Horticulture here at the zoo.
And today we're at Riggenstein Small Mammal Reptile House. We are behind the scenes in what we call the catwalk area. So you might hear some squeaks and squawks from Puerto Rican parrots and see one of our living gardens right here. Yeah, start with the hardest question. What do you do here?
I am in charge of all of the plants at the zoo. So all of the gardens, the tree canopy, all of the main zoo, as well as the 14-acre nature boardwalk on the south side of the zoo.
Awesome. And when I think about the zoo, obviously we're in the middle of Lincoln Park and there's greenery and habitat all around us. But over the last 10 plus years, the zoo's really evolved. We're an accredited garden, accredited arboretum.
Yep.
What does that process look like? And what does that mean? What are all those stamps of approval mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So being accredited really comes back to the science of what we're doing. So horticulture is a science. So we're using science-based approach to the care of all of our plants, as well as the art side of horticulture, which really goes into the aesthetics of gardens. So my team does the garden maintenance, as well as managing everything from our tree canopy to our flower installations to the design of our gardens. So all of that kind of works together to go into these accreditations. But also what it is a collaboration between all different departments here, showing that we are a science-focused institution and that we are really conserving plants similar to the way that we work with animals.
You just mentioned the diversity of things that you do. I think people see our beautiful gardens and the tulips in the spring, but what they might not think about are all the other places we have greenery and gardens at the zoo. So that might be green roofs or up here behind the scenes or in the animals' habitats. Can you talk about what that process looks like and care of those different spaces?
Sure, yeah. So we have 33,000 square feet of green roof here at the zoo, which is a lot of space. So almost all the buildings at the zoo have some form of green roof. So that's a lot of management that needs to happen to get those spaces cleaned up as well. So we're maintaining those often. We'll be there 2 to 3 times a year to make sure that the plants are thriving on top of the green roofs, as well as checking irrigation and stuff like that. And then we also have different tasks that we're doing all along. So we have tree canopy. We're managing that very different than we are our perennial gardens. So that's something that's different as well. You might not think about that when you're walking under the trees, but all that are managed.
Yeah. And when you're talking about tree canopy, can you explain to people what that means? Is that the coverage of shade? Is that the height of the trees? What is that?
Yeah,
how do you explain that to a layman?
Yeah, so pretend like you're taking a bird's eye view of the zoo, and you can see the extent of our canopy from that view. And so really the canopy is any square space that is taken up by the tree. And so what it does allow us to have a lot of shade, but it also creates habitat for wildlife. So we have a lot of different urban wildlife that live here on site as their home. And so that's important to us to have that tree canopy to support them, as well as to create a great guest experience for our visitors here at the zoo.
Great. Awesome. Some things you don't think about. Don't forget to look up when you're here.
Exactly.
Speaking of animals in the habitats, obviously we have urban wildlife outside that utilize all our plants and trees and shrubs.
Yes.
But we also have the plants in the habitats here. What does that look like? We are in Chicago, but we care for animals from all different parts of the world and plants from all different parts of the world. So how are you, I know you mentioned collaboration, working with other teams to make sure the animals have the best plants.
Yeah, exactly. So we are working directly with the curators for the animal areas, as well as zoological managers and even keepers, to understand what plants might work best for different animal species. But along with that, we're working with the vet staff to understand the toxicity of plants, so that we evaluate the plants based off of those properties, and we're not giving plants to animals that can't have those plants. So we have a process that we go through whenever we want to introduce a new species onto our site to make sure that it's not something that will harm an animal in any way. And then based on those recommendations, we can choose the best plant possible for the animal exhibit. And we don't necessarily understand animal behavior, so we really are dependent upon those keepers and zoological managers and curators to help us understand how the animals will react with the certain plants. And all animals are different too, so personality of an animal may be different in a different setting. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen, animals here eat plants or play with plants, or when the polar bears first arrived, just rip whole trees out of the ground because they felt like it.
It's a challenge for sure.
So yeah, I imagine there's a lot at play.
Yeah.
One of the habitats here at the zoo downstairs at Small Mammal is the dry desert, and there's all the air plants. And how are you dealing with humidity and all the things that the plants need?
Yeah.
So
it's kind of we kind of have to go with what we are given. So the buildings that the animals are in, and we have these kind of tropical scenes or dry desert scenes, are not necessarily built for plants. So these spaces have been built for animals. So that was first and foremost for us. And then we try to find plants that will match that environment that we're trying to create, but also how is the building functioning in that way. So you might see misters throughout some of our spaces that are adding humidity back. And most of that is based on animal care recommendations and not on plant care. So we try to do our best to match the plants that will work best with those conditions.
Yeah. Great. Thinking about how big this space is, we have 49 acres.
Yeah.
And what does the what is the importance of biodiversity of our plants and trees and shrubs and natives versus non-natives?
Yeah.
How do you curate a space that big?
Well, that's a good question. We really work with, diversity of species is super important to us here. So imagine we planted a full monoculture of one species of plants, how quickly that would go with disease or a pest infestation or something to that effect, and then we would have nothing left. So that's a main reason we're really focused on diversity of species. Plus, it allows us to have food and habitat and homes for wildlife that, live in this area, as well as gives us, and this is going to sound funny, but it gives us a germplasm, which is the genetics of different plants throughout this space. And so having a diverse area really is kind of our main goal when it comes to the plant life. But, there's give and take with everything. We're not introducing plants that are invasive. That's another thing that I think is commonly thought of when we're bringing plants from a different country or that are native to a different area. We're very careful and cautious about that. We're evaluating our own plants to make sure that I saw that seeding around a little bit. Let's check it. Is it starting to escape? And if we feel like it is, or maybe that plant hasn't been evaluated by the industry completely, then we just will remove it and decide that, this isn't worth it if it's going to escape into the gardens. But then with the native side of things, we're really working to include natives through all of our landscapes. It's not necessarily something that we have written down in that way, but it is important that natives are part of our landscape. The wildlife here know native plants, so they're already accustomed to using those plants to live and thrive on. But then also, as we're moving into a different climates, those plants have already adapted over time to this space. So it's likely that those plants will be the first to be able to adapt moving forward as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this is something I've learned in my time working with horticulture, that different parts of the world and of the United States have zones and hardiness and all these scales and recommendations that you're sort of working within. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so what they're really looking at when they give us a hardiness zone is our mean average winter low temp. Okay. So not really looking at the high end of the temperature, they're looking at the low end. And so because we're in the Midwest and Chicago has historically been known to be very cold, we are kind of lucky because we're right on the lake, which means we have a bit of a microclimate. We don't get as cold or as hot because of the lake effect. So we're so close to Lake Michigan. But because of that, our cold temperatures still are going to regulate the plants that we can grow here on site. So if we drop down to -30, which isn't unheard of in this area,
unfortunately,
our plants that are marginally hardy in this area may not make it after that. So I think we've kind of been testing the waters. Historically, we were in USDA Zone 5, and now we are all the way up to 6B, which is quite warm. So we've tried Zone 6, Zone 7 plants in our area now to see what happens, and we may do a little extra winter protection like adding mulch or doing a leaf layer at the base of the roots to add some more insulation, especially if we're not getting snow, which is unpredictable at this point in time. So, yeah, we're just trying to see where our zone really can go, but we have to understand that the unpredictability of the weather may knock back some of our plants. Even the ones that are hardy sometimes get knocked back to the ground, some of our woody plants.
I feel like that in the Chicago winter. I get it.
After we're done.
Speaking of seasonality, Chicago is unique in that way too, in that we have a full 4 distinct seasons. And so what does that look like? How are you planning sort of season over season or year over year?
Yeah, seasonality is huge in the Midwest and something I really enjoy about horticulture, and I know my team really enjoys that as well, but we're constantly a few seasons ahead. So we are in November right now, soon to be December, and we're now planning all of our summer plantings for next season. And some gardens will do that years in advance, and so they have it all planned out years and years, but we kind of work off of an availability. We don't have growing facilities here to grow our own plants, so we use different sources, wholesalers, to help us get some like our summer annual plants and stuff in. So we'll use their availability lists and make our designs around those. The team finds inspiration from a lot of different things. So we go from designing a couple seasons in advance, and then we move right into garden maintenance. So people often ask me, what are you doing in the winter? How can you possibly have something to do? Well, all of the woody plants on our site, that's when we're managing those. We're maintaining, we're looking at the form of the tree without its leaves and understanding, you know, which branches we need to remove for safety or for structure of the tree, for the health of the tree. And so all of that is happening over the winter months. And then moving into spring, it's just full on garden work. So we start with like cutting back our perennials, which we do leave for most of the winter. So we'll wait as long as we can to cut them and then take those down to the ground, which is a lot of manual labor.
Yeah.
And then move straight into planting gardens and annual planting and all that, kind of this long, big cycle that we kind of go through every year.
And you mentioned planning for the gardens, which is more like seasonally or within a year in advance. But when you're thinking of planting trees and these really long-lived species, we've had conversations where you're planning like 50, 100 years into the future. So how can you even conceptualize 100 years from now? What is that? Like, what's your goal? Is it the canopy? Is it diversity?
I think it's both.
Okay.
For us, like, we are like caretakers of the lands. Like, we are stewards of lands. And that's just kind of a huge role, to be honest, and a little bit overwhelming if you think too hard about it. Yeah. But to be honest, like, we have to plant now for the future to be able to get the benefits of planting. I mean, trees literally give us oxygen to breathe. Trees are the answer, you know, to a lot of the problems that we're having, plants and trees. So if we're not planting trees actively or understanding, you know, this tree is older, let's put something nearby, but not too close that it's not going to thrive. Mm-hmm. So that when that tree does naturally end, its life ends, we have this other tree already planted that maybe has 20-ish years already in the ground. So like similarly, our oak canopy, which we've done a lot of work with, we have some bur oaks that predate the founding of the zoo, which is really, really cool. We've been working on succession planting of those oak trees. So we found some growing in nearby gardens that were maybe too close to a fence or just not in an ideal location. So we were able to dig those and move those into a better spot that will hopefully have enough space for them to grow over time. One thing I think as a designer, like of gardens, we want to pack things in too tightly that don't allow for them to get to their mature size. So oaks need a huge amount of space. So let's give them the space to grow and not try to fit in, you know, every little tiny woody plant that, you know, may compete with it while it's growing. So you will see kind of a shift in our landscape at the zoo if you've been a regular visitor the last 10 years. From having a lot of woodies tucked in together to having more space between woody plants with larger swaths of perennial gardens underneath. So it's kind of where we're looking at when it's like that long-term planning.
We think Self-On is a great example of that, right? It's these like beautiful, tall, old oak trees with these perennial gardens that are very beautiful.
Yeah.
You mentioned trees and providing the air we breathe and like shade and it just made me think of the different jobs that plants can have.
Yeah.
Those being some of them, but thinking about nature boardwalk and like the long grasses that keep the banks, sturdy and at bay.
Yeah.
What are some of the jobs that plants have, and like how are you using them strategically across the zoo?
Yeah. So a lot of things kind of go into this conversation, but we already talked a little bit about climate change, but also understanding that we're having variable weather. Our plants are really fixing the soil for us. So they're nitrogen fixing, they're helping us to create better soils. But then also we're planting so that as we move into the future, we're not needing to add as much water back. So understanding which plants will thrive in these up and down conditions that we have, these super wet springs and followed by a dry summer, or even just like 3 or 4 weeks of dry can really affect a garden. So which plants can we use for that, and how are they going to benefit us in those spaces, not only ornamentally, so what are they giving us for our eyes to see, for us to feast on, makes it really worth it. But then also, like, how are they providing back for our habitat? We're for wildlife for all, right? That's the whole zoo's mission, and that's exactly what we're doing in horticulture. We're really creating space for wildlife to thrive. That's it. Like, that's really our goal here. And so by utilizing plants in the proper spaces, that's really what we're trying to achieve. So, yeah.
If someone were trying to live wildlife friendly,
Yeah.
here in Chicago, or a listener anywhere, but in Chicago, a lot of us have a little space. Yeah. What are some things that you can do to live wildlife friendly at home with plants?
Good question. I think when you're looking at plants, personally, I love to have plants inside my home. So if you're able to get house plants, I think that can be really fun. You could also get your own little like ladybug colony going inside. You get some natural predators there for any sort of bugs that come into your home with your plants. But living wildlife friendly with plants really is understanding how you can give back. Maybe you just have a little tiny space. Maybe you have one little balcony. Fill it with plants. Those plants are going to give off oxygen. They're going to make your life better. Gardening gives you calm, right? I don't know if that's true for a full-time gardening position, but in the 1 to 2 hours a day is great to get out and work with your plants. So you're getting a little bit of mental health help with working with plants, but then also cleaning your air for you so you can breathe cleaner air. And then also, if you think about every little house throughout or every balcony having some sort of plant life, how that could affect us long term is immense.
Yeah.
So I encourage everyone to really get out and get some plants and get your hands dirty. Understand how different plants grow. They can grow on balconies. You can grow thriving gardens with even produce produced in the summertime, all the way down to just moving some stuff inside to have stuff over the winter as well. So help us regreen the earth. Yeah, totally.
You mentioned produce, and that is also a thing that horticulture helps here at the zoo. Some of the plants provide food for the animals.
Yes.
What does that look like? Is that a typical fruit or vegetable? Is that just some leaves from a plant?
Yeah, we have a couple different spots on site that we grow food for the animals. So most of them are behind the scenes, but this year we converted an edible garden at Farm in the Zoo to browse production. And this look like an edible garden for humans, really, because we were growing things like tomatoes and peppers, and we did a huge patch of sweet potatoes. We harvested over 240 pounds of sweet potatoes in our garden, which is really not a huge amount in the grand scheme of food for animals, but it offered enrichment for some of the different species we have here on site. But so we're growing things like mulberry trees, things that horticulture considers weed trees in this area, but they are very tasty for our animals. So we continue to grow them. We cut them twice a week. We deliver during the growing season. And then same with our edible garden, where we're growing tomatoes and zucchini and cucumbers, and we grew tons of pumpkins, and we even grew sunflowers and then fed the seed heads out to different bird species and different primate species to be able to really enjoy those benefits of having something that was grown here on our site.
Awesome. We've talked about Lincoln Park Zoo being a differentiator because of being a zoo, accredited zoo, garden, and arboretum.
Yeah.
But one thing we've talked about too that is perhaps different than other botanic gardens, for example, is the fact that we're free. And 3.5 million people come here every year.
It's huge.
what does that mean for you as someone who's talking about public gardens and just having that free access to all those people?
It's huge for the public garden worlds. It is unlikely that you'll find another public garden that has that visitorship. That is just massive. And so I think one of the misconceptions is that you're come to the zoo to see the animals, but I think people are surprised when they understand that we are an accredited botanic garden, accredited arboretum, and we have accredited plant collections. Those things are really, really important to us, but also we have this resource. We're using our land to create beautiful landscapes for people to enjoy, for animals to live in. And that's a huge asset. You don't have to pay to get in to see it. It's kind of like our land is your land kind of philosophy. Like, we're doing it so that the visitors can really enjoy it, but also for our animals, for us, and then again for safety and all those other things that we're worried about here as well. Yeah.
And thinking of, we talked a little bit about climate change and how you're planning for the future. But what does the future look like for horticulture here at the zoo? What's like the next big frontier or big project that you're working for?
We had a lot going for us right now. So after these accreditations, I think we kind of felt a little lull of like, oof, like we got it. And then how do we continue to maintain those accreditations, but also live up to them? Like, we are an accredited botanic garden, and I think you'll start to see the grounds shift to having more creative design. We're using more art in the garden with natural materials, so you'll see that as well. If you haven't seen our Westgate entry, we've done a lot of different work out there with creative garden installations. And then also we're really looking to get more into the science side or research side of horticulture. So we're doing studies in phenology with our hibiscus collection, and then also working towards spring flowering trees as well. So understanding how our climate shifts and how those life cycles of plants are changing every year is really important to us as well.
And I have been here now for 12 years. It feels like a long time. And I've seen the shifts firsthand, which has been very cool. Can you talk about how, like, where management started? And it was more just, I think, like caretaking, and now it's the science-based and the phenology studies. What is, like, that's a lot in 10 years to accomplish. So how did that sort of roll out?
Yeah, so the horticulture program at the zoo didn't even start until 2010. There was landscape here, right? Our tree canopy, a lot of it is older than that. But then the gardens were planted with a lot of same species repeated over and over. And then starting in 2010, a horticulture department started and then later moved into the animal care department. So now we say all living things under one roof, right? So we're all managed under the same department, which I think is really helpful because there's really collaboration there. We're collaborating with our animal care team members all of the time. But then our shift really started when we started to see bigger swaths of gardens installed. So if you've seen the Rhino Hillside Garden across from the rhinos, that happened in 2017. And then the Eastgate construction, similar timing. And you saw the shift in those spaces just by themselves of using more natives and more of a meadow style planting than just having like boxes of single species, more intertwining of different species, and kind of created a zoo aesthetic that I'm calling the wild garden. But it has shifted over time to allow us to grow a diversity of species. So you may come and see us digging out some plants, and what we're doing is really transitioning those spaces to be more diverse when it comes to different taxa or varieties of plants, but also thinking more about like what species can we bring onto sites. If you happen to be at the zoo this last summer, the monarchs were everywhere. And people think, oh, milkweed, you need milkweed, but you need all the nectar plants too. Other flowers are huge for that species. And those are, monarchs are a buzz species. They're very charismatic and beautiful butterflies, but there's so many other native species that we're really working to create spaces for. So that's kind of like our transition has been drastic if you've been around for the whole time. But it really is important that we're giving the best care to our grounds and our landscape as we are to our animals. That's kind of the transition of our space has been, motivated by it.
Yeah, I love it. And if you haven't been here in a while, come check out the gardens, because that's the first thing everyone in my life comments on is if they haven't been here in a while, like, I don't remember it being this beautiful. And like, yeah, you got to keep coming back because every season is a little different.
It is. It's absolutely different.
All right, Katrina. You obviously have a lot on your plate here and you're handling a lot of things, but you also have a whole life outside of the zoo.
I do.
People forget that part, that when sometimes the zoo becomes our whole personality, right? So what are some things that you enjoy doing when you're not director of horticulture, Katrina?
Yeah, so I'm an avid runner. So if you may see me around the zoo after work, getting my miles in. I really enjoy spending more time outside to just decompress versus, work is work sometimes, and you have to do what you need to do, but I like to be outside as much as possible. And then I love to travel, so I'm constantly thinking about my next trip and planning and scheming and trying to come up with, the best ways to get the most bang for my buck when it comes to travel as well.
What's your next trip? What's next on the list?
Oh, there's so much, but a friend of mine and I have been talking about going to Patagonia.
I did that last year.
I know it was it. I was so jealous.
Do it.
Yeah, I really want to go. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.